In every generation, monsters are born, but not the kind with horns or claws. No, these monsters wear human faces. They smile, they speak, they blend in, and yet inside them is a hunger, a dark, bottomless hunger. Tonight we walk into the minds of the most brutal serial killers the world has ever known. These aren't just stories of death, they are stories of obsession, of rage, of complete disconnection from humanity. Some did it for pleasure, some for revenge, and others simply because they could. We won't tell these stories to glorify evil, we tell them to confront it, to remember the victims, to understand how it hides in plain sight. Because the devil doesn't wear red, he wears a suit or a uniform or a father's smile. Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. The Soviet Union didn't believe in serial killers, but Andrei Chikatilo made sure they couldn't ignore the truth. Born in 1936 in Ukraine during Stalin's Great Famine, Chikatilo's early life was soaked in trauma. His family was starving. He was told his brother had been kidnapped and eaten. His father was labeled a coward during the war and publicly shamed. His mother was distant, cold, and reportedly abusive. As a boy, Andrei was weak, painfully shy, and socially isolated. He suffered from chronic bedwetting and, more crucially, impotence, something that haunted him and would later define his violence. He was bullied mercilessly, especially in adolescence. In his 20s and 30s, he tried to function like a normal man. He got married, had children. He worked as a teacher, but inside, he was unraveling. He began molesting students, eventually fired, but not prosecuted. He slid through the cracks of a system more concerned with reputation than justice. In 1978, he committed his first known murder, a 9-year-old girl. He lured her into a cabin, attacked her, stabbed her to death, and found, for the first time, that murder aroused him. It awakened something inside him that had been buried for decades. Over the next 12 years, he killed again and again, often children and teens, both boys and girls. He mutilated them, cutting out eyes, ears, genitals. He stabbed some victims over 30 times. He removed internal organs. He even bit off tongues and nipples. Some victims had pieces of their flesh chewed or removed, possibly eaten. He would leave their bodies in forests, rivers, train yards. The pattern was clear to investigators, but not to the Soviet regime, which still insisted such crimes didn't exist in a communist society. In 1984, he was arrested on suspicion, but DNA tests at the time couldn't conclusively match him, and he was released. He would go on to kill at least 20 more times before he was finally caught in 1990. The arrest was pure chance. An undercover officer noticed him approaching young people at a station. Upon surveillance and questioning, police found incriminating items in his briefcase: rope. Caged in a steel cell, he screamed at the judge, stripped naked, licked the bars. He tried to appear insane, but it didn't matter. The court found him guilty of 52 murders. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1994, a single bullet behind the ear. No ceremony, no closure. His legacy is one of pure carnage. A killer born from trauma, hiding in plain sight, enabled by a system that chose silence over action. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He slipped through the cracks of Los Angeles, a shadow in the dark, a phantom in the heat of summer. He didn't have a type. He didn't have a pattern. He killed whoever he wanted. His name was Richard Ramirez. To the world, he became the Night Stalker. Born in 1960 in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez was the youngest of 5. His father was abusive. Violent outbursts were routine. But worse than that, Richard's cousin Mike, a Vietnam War veteran, introduced him to real-life horror. Mike showed him Polaroids of women he had raped and decapitated during the war. He taught Richard about stealth, stalking, domination, and at just 13 years old, Richard watched Mike shoot his wife in the face, right in front of him. The trauma fused with fantasy. By 15, he was experimenting with Satanism, breaking into homes, and using heavy drugs like cocaine and LSD. By 24, he began to kill. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez committed at least 13 murders, possibly more. He raped, stabbed, shot, and bludgeoned his victims. He attacked men and women, children, and seniors. Sometimes he left messages in lipstick, pentagrams, "Hail Satan." In one case, he broke into a home, shot the husband, and then told the wife, "Swear on Satan that you love him." He forced victims to pray to the devil. He wore black clothes and baseball caps. He stole jewelry and dumped it off for drug money. Police were baffled. His crimes were random. He used different weapons, left no consistent pattern. It was chaos by design. But a break came when one victim survived. Her description, combined with fingerprints from a stolen car, led to a mugshot being released to the public. On August 31, 1985, a group of civilians spotted him in East LA. They chased him down and beat him with a pipe until police arrived. At trial, Ramirez showed no remorse. He smiled, flashed a pentagram carved into his hand, and said, "Hail Satan." He was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, and 14 burglaries. Sentenced to death, Ramirez spent over 2 decades on death row. He died in 2013 of complications from lymphoma. His last words? Unknown, but his eyes were empty, even at the end. Hakim Kroll, the cannibal of the Ruhr, Germany, 1960s. A quiet man lived alone in a small, grimy apartment in the industrial town, raped and strangled near a lake. No one suspected him. So he kept going. For over 20 years. He didn't kill quickly. He stalked his victims, often young girls or women walking alone. Once he had them, he'd strangle them, molest the corpses, then cut off pieces to eat later. Why? He said human flesh was cheaper than pork. Kroll would boil body parts, store them in his fridge, and cook them into stews. When asked why he started eating people, he replied, "Food was expensive, and I got used to it." In total, Kroll admitted to murdering at least 14 people. The youngest? Just 4 years old. He was caught in 1976. Not by police, but by a plumber. Neighbors had complained about a clogged drain. When maintenance opened it, they found human remains. A child's hand and part of a lung. Inside Kroll's apartment, police found a pot on the stove. Inside was a stew, with human flesh floating in it. Kroll calmly confessed, sitting on his bed as police vomited around him. He was sentenced to life in prison and died in 1991. Unlike others, he didn't seem proud or evil. He seemed indifferent. That made him all the more terrifying. America's first female serial killer. Most serial killers are men, but Eileen Wuornos was different. She was called America's first female serial killer, though her story is far more complicated than the headlines. Born in 1956 in Michigan, Eileen never stood a chance. Her father was a convicted child molester who hanged himself in prison. Her mother abandoned her at age 4. She was raised by alcoholic grandparents who beat and sexually abused her. By age 11, she was prostituting herself for food and cigarettes. At 14, she was pregnant, raped by a family friend. Her baby was taken away. She was kicked out of the house and lived in the woods. She drifted from town to town, arrested for theft, assault, prostitution, until 1989, when the murders began. To the outside world, he was just an old man, frail, polite, quiet, but behind that wrinkled face was a monster far more twisted than any fiction. Albert Fish, born in 1870, was one of the most depraved serial killers in American history. He grew up in a family riddled with mental illness, hallucinations, mania, suicides. As a child, he was beaten in an orphanage, where he began to enjoy pain. By adulthood, Fish had developed disturbing fetishes. He whipped himself bloody, inserted needles into his body, over 20 found in his pelvis via X-ray, drank urine and consumed feces, and most disturbingly, he began preying on children. Fish would lure boys and girls, typically between 4 and 11 years old, with candy or job offers. He would rape, torture and kill them, and sometimes cook and eat parts of their bodies. His most notorious victim was Grace Budd, 10 years old. He convinced her parents to let her accompany him to a fake birthday party. She never returned. 6 years later, Fish sent a detailed letter to her mother, describing how he strangled Grace and cooked her flesh in a stew. He was arrested in 1934. He confessed calmly. No remorse, no emotion. In court, experts described him as sadistic, cannibalistic, and psychotic. Yet he was declared sane and sentenced to die. On January 16, 1936, Albert Fish was executed in the electric chair. Due to the metal needles inside him, it's rumored the chair malfunctioned. His final words? "I don't even know why I'm here." Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes. Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes. Pedro Lopez is considered by many to be the most prolific child killer in modern history. He confessed to murdering over 300 girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Born in 1948 in Colombia, Lopez was abandoned at a young age and lived on the streets. At age 8, he was kidnapped and raped by a stranger. Instead of breaking him, it seemed to awaken something darker. By his teens, he began assaulting and murdering young girls. He traveled from town to town, targeting rural communities. His victims were always the same, girls aged 8 to 12. He would lure them away from markets, rape, strangle, and bury them in mass graves. Sometimes he killed 3 in one day. He was caught in 1980 after attempting to abduct another girl. He confessed to everything, even led police to dozens of graves. In Ecuador, he was convicted of 110 murders, but served only 14 years due to the country's maximum sentence laws. After his release, he was arrested in Colombia, then sent to a psychiatric hospital, and eventually released again. Pedro Lopez disappeared in 1998. His current location? Unknown. Javed Iqbal, the 100-child killer. Javed Iqbal, a wealthy man in Lahore, Pakistan, shocked the world when he sent a letter to a local newspaper in 1999. "I have killed 100 children, all boys between 6 and 16. Their bodies have been dissolved in acid." Police raided his home. Inside, they found vats of acid, clothing, and photographs of the victims. He had documented every name, every age, and kept personal items from each child. Iqbal targeted runaway boys, those living on the streets. He promised them work, food, or shelter. Instead, he raped, strangled, and dissolved them in acid to eliminate evidence. Why did he do it? He claimed it was revenge on the police. Years earlier, he had been falsely accused of abuse and was allegedly tortured. He said his crimes were a message to expose how easily children on the streets could vanish, and no one would care. He turned himself in. A judge sentenced him to death and ruled that his punishment would mirror his crimes. He shall be strangled with the same chain, then his body dissolved in acid in front of the parents. But that never happened. Just days before his sentence was to be carried out, Javed Iqbal was found dead in his cell, hanged. Some say it was suicide. Others believe the families of his victims, or guards, took justice into their own hands. What we learn from darkness. What makes a serial killer? Is it nature or nurture, evil or trauma, born monsters or made by the world? The killers we've explored tonight, Chikatilo, Ramirez, Fish, Lopez, Iqbal, Kroll, Warnos, came from different countries, different upbringings, different motivations, but they share one thing in common: a complete disconnection from empathy, the ability to look another human in the eyes and see nothing. These stories are not told to glorify evil. They're not entertainment. They are warnings, reminders that the monsters we fear most don't hide under our beds. They walk among us, shop in our grocery stores, smile in our offices. Sometimes they even wear uniforms or call themselves family. The truth is, evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, it waits, it watches, and when the world turns its back, it strikes. What we owe to the victims, every child lost, every family broken, is to remember, to pay attention, to never ignore the signs, because once evil is ignored, it grows teeth.